The wait is finally over. The new NFL season starts this week. I'm Diana Rossini, senior NFL insider at The Athletic, and my new podcast, Scoop City, is ready to be your go-to football companion this season. Twice a week, myself and Chase Daniel, who played quarterback for 7 different franchises in 14 years, will take you inside the inner workings of the NFL. You'll hear fresh intel, deep analysis, and fascinating interviews with big-ticket guests. So far, we've sat down with Andy Reid, Josh Allen, Sean Payton, and a host of others, with loads more to come. So check out Scoop City this NFL season. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Athletic.
It's finally happened. Marc Marquez is a MotoGP race winner again after almost 3 years. He's finally done it on Ducati. He's finally won a sprint race. But his brother slightly took the shine off this incredible seismic weekend by having a really pretty terrifying clash with Pecco Bagnaia that could have a huge impact on the 2024 MotoGP title race and led to some reignited old feuds. I think that's the best way of putting it, because there was a bit of a split between the Marquez camp and the Valentino Rossi affiliated camp over everything that happened here. So let's get straight into the crash. Sadly, I'd love to be shouting about Marc Marquez first of all, but the crash was just a little bit too attention grabbing. This is the Race MotoGP Podcast. I'm Matt Beer. Simon Patterson hasn't been allowed out of the Aragon Media Centre yet, and Val Khorounzhiy hasn't been allowed to stop work here, because we've got to crack straight into this. Simon, you go first. Describe the collision between Alex Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia and give your take on it. Because as you said in our work chat earlier, you do have opinions.
I always have opinions, Matt. That's what I'm here for.
Absolutely.
So Alex Marquez, well, first of all, let's set the scene. Pecco Bagnaia had made had another terrible start, same as in the sprint race, had to do a lot of work coming through the field, found himself in actually a fairly good position. Actually, it was looking like a race of damage limitation. As he came through from fourth, was clearly much faster than Alex Marquez, had absolutely hoovered him up, and I think was just waiting for the right opportunity to make a pass with what you would have presumed would have been as least risk as possible. Alex Marquez coming out of below the wall, coming out of the left-hander there, made a little bit of a mistake, just ran a fraction wide, didn't quite go off the track, but put a couple of wheels on the curb, so it was definitely, it was off the racing line. Bagnaia didn't try to overtake him per se, he just kept doing what he was doing. He stuck to his racing line, which was a lot faster because he braked in the right place as opposed to Alex, who'd braked a bit late. And for me, Alex Marquez rejoined the racing line as if he was alone on the track. He didn't look to see where Bagnaia was. He knew that there was a bike, even if he wasn't sure it was Bagnaia, in close proximity to him, because he just got a pit board not long before it saying +0 essentially, and MotoGP bikes are loud, so he heard that it was there. He rejoined essentially into the side of Pecco Bagnaia. The two of them tangled. They went down very clumsily. Pecco Bagnaia was very lucky actually to walk away with just a few contusions, because he spent a lot of time trapped underneath a bike, which is not somewhere you ever want to see anyone. That was quite scary.
Listeners, I expect you have seen it, but if you haven't, when we say trapped under the bike, that's not when they came to rest. That's being dragged along underneath two intertwined bikes through a gravel trap. It was horrible.
And you know how hard the impact is when it changes from the asphalt to the gravel. So imagine that impact while you're still trapped under a bike and rolling into that. I'm surprised and obviously super, 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 super happy that he wasn't hurt worse than that, because they had a slow-mo camera right there, and the slow-mo captured that particular moment. It looks really violent. It looks really bad.
Yeah, Val, what was your take on how it happened and who was at fault?
I have no idea. That's so Simon is here to have opinions. I'm here to say I have no idea and shrug my shoulders. And
that's your own brand of human diplomacy, though. I think, Val, you see every side of all stories all the time, except when it comes to Yamaha development. But
my initial hunch from the initial broadcast angles was that it's that sort of regular clash of two riders going for the same piece of tarmac, except with Alex substantially overplaying his hand and being reckless. And then I saw the helicopter camera, and it softened me up a little bit in terms of my stance towards how Alex rode. I mean, I still think he was probably a bit careless, and I don't buy that he didn't know a bike could have been there. And we don't know whether really what he was thinking in approaching the corner when he did. It's, we only have his word for it that it was just completely oblivious. I think he's a little bit too good to be completely oblivious of the situation. But also, you look at the helicopter camera, and Bagnaia does pinch off his line a bit. And, but Bagnaia does not leave him room. As Alex said, 1 meter more would have been nice. At least 1 meter. There was not 1 meter there. There was a visit to the curb, basically. And at that point, yeah, probably Alex Marquez should have rolled out of the gas, but it does take two to tango. Pecco Bagnaia will have had more situational awareness from just where he was coming from of where Alex might be. So we judge Alex for not knowing better, and that's fair. When you go off that far off the racing line, you really have to do a better job of just trying to ascertain your surroundings. But I don't understand why Bagnaia had to close him the way he did, going by the helicopter cam. And I think maybe I don't understand the dynamics of the corner. That's entirely possible. But also maybe this is Aragon, and you just do not want to deviate from the racing line at any second for any reason. And maybe he just assumed that the speed mismatch was such that by then he was already, clear. There's no spotter in his ear. So
that's exactly it. I think he thought he had completed the pass.
Yeah. No. You're probably correct. But then that puts some of the blame on his shoulders. Even if he was at fault for assuming that Alex would yield, maybe Alex should have yielded. Maybe that would have been the reasonable thing to do. But also, it's Alex Marquez. He won't. He rides. He is a particularly aggressive rider. He's been in the wars. He's been on the giving end and on the receiving end. And if the race situation was also there, that if Alex Marquez gives up the position, that's it. That's the podium fight over. Whereas Pecco felt it was going to be a done deal anyway. I think probably, but it was not easy to overtake at Aragon this weekend because there was one line. So you still had to get it done, and you still had to fight for it. So as you can tell, I'm a little maybe 60-40 on this one.
That does kind of answer a question Jasper Pendlebury from the Race Members Club put to us. Always on the post-race episodes of the Race MotoGP podcast. If you're part of the Members Club, which you can join by searching for us on Patreon or via the-race.com/members-club, you can throw in questions that we'll answer in the post-race episodes or in specials just for the Members Club. Jasper said, did Pecco make the smartest choice for his championship? I haven't seen the steward's decision when writing this, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But even if Alex was at fault, could or should Pecco have done something to avoid the crash? Now, my take on this is very much the Simon line of Alex went so far away from the racing line, had made the mistake. The pressure was on him to just give up the corner or do the avoiding action. But Val, from what you're saying, it feels like you think Pecco could have actually played a smarter hand, as Jasper puts it. And do you think he should have done, given the championship position? He had a lot more to lose in this than Alex Marquez.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's easy to say sitting in my chair after the fact. It's it's a game of millimeters. It's, I imagine, the easiest mistake to make. And we get the helicam, we get the whatever slow-mo shots, whatever, we get all the traces and whatever. They get their two eyes and their ears, and the head mobility through the corner isn't great. You can't exactly just swivel around and periscope it through the corner. You see what you see and you feel what you feel. From where I am sitting, and again, maybe I don't get the dynamics of the corner, but from where I was sitting, there was a needless amount of either squeezing or just carelessness in terms of the insurance wasn't built in there. I think he took a risk that he didn't need to take, and for me it contrasts with early in the race we saw Martin lunge the absolute hell out of Acosta, just dive bomb him to high heavens through the reverse corkscrew, and they both come out of that. They've run wide. They come out of that 10 kilometers an hour. They're basically they're rolling around. in that situation, Alex, who was behind them, could have made it his business too, and could have very easily created something there. And he was just like, nope, not now, not yet. And, he was repaid for that, for staying in the race until he didn't, because in a different situation, he wasn't so discretion, better part of valor, etc. But, I think this was avoidable from both parties, certainly. Just an unsatisfying answer, but it's just how it is sometimes.
Well, you semi-sold me on the Pecco could have done a little bit more, but I'm still in the camp of, Bagnaia could have left 1 metre more. Alex could have had some awareness of other bikes being on the track during a MotoGP race. I think that was what, for me, Marquez went wrong. One of my favourite Members Club questions was Angelina Westerland saying, what do we think about the steward's decision? And the reason I like this question so much is she asked it straight away, saying, I'm sure there will be a steward's decision. It was a no action, wasn't it? Were either of you two surprised by that?
Not massively.
Simon's nodding straight away.
I think in the context of what we've seen previously, I mean, look, no one here, even Pecco Bagnaia, believes that Alex Marquez should have like a race ban for this. But I think the context of what we've seen from other things and what maybe the problem is, saying that I've come to expect anything of the stewards because they tend to be so unpredictable. But I think in the context of what we've seen previously, no one at all would have been surprised to see a long lap penalty come Alex Marquez's way.
Yeah.
I think that would have been kind of a realistic, reasonable thing to deal with this. So I was a little bit surprised to see them deliver no further action, and also quite surprised at some of the reasoning for it, to be honest. I love the fact that in the official decision they spelled Pecco's name wrong. I think that's quite funny. And then they went on to say that essentially it was mitigated because of the nature of Aragon this weekend and there being one racing line, which is something we'll come on to a little bit further. But I think that very much ignores the fact that Alex Marquez left that racing line.
Yeah.
So, obviously Pecco stuck to the line because he thought he'd made the pass. And like you said earlier, Matt, he didn't want to deviate from it. But I think there has to be some taking into account of the fact that Alex Marquez did leave it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like that reasoning kind of opens us up to saying it was a wet race, therefore anything goes almost. But go on, Val.
Yeah, no, because I don't like to be on the side of it. I'm not even sure I agree with it or not. And if it was a 3-place grid penalty for Alex, I wouldn't be up in arms exactly. You know me, I don't like the phrase racing incident. Yeah. I think racing incident is what people say when they don't feel like thinking about a crash. Genuinely. I think, honestly, if any championship out there decides that there can't be a racing incident, somebody is always guilty, I'm fine with that. Because at least then you take the time to look at what happened. I know this is a very hardliner, disagreeable position, and I'm not sure I actually mean it, but I do mean that I don't like racing incident as a turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Every incident is a race. I think the people who use racing incident, sometimes you could show up to the paddock and you shoot the other rider, and that's a racing incident in some people's eyes. Anyway, regardless of that, but I think we don't have a good framework for how to deal with these particular crashes, and we've been getting a few of them of, just two lines intersecting because somebody got the corner a bit wrong but doesn't yet think that means they should give up the position. I don't think there's universal agreement of what's to be done and what's the right way for the rider ahead and the rider behind to behave in that situation. So until there's some sort of agreement in that regard, I mean, what else are you going to call it?
But this actually leads us to Dan Neal from Members Club's question, because he says this is another example of a rider laying the bike on top of someone on their inside. This strategy at overtaking is getting more and more dangerous. Is it going to be looked at in the future? So Val, you like you say, there's no rule precedent. The stewards don't really have anything to work from, but this is also happening. This kind of crash is happening more and more. Should there be more of a kind of defined framework for how this is punished?
Yeah, but I think nobody wants at the same time, nobody wants ultra prescribed racing guidelines, or at least I think that's a really good way to irritate everybody. We're just robots, we can't even race one another. If you told all the riders that there's a certain way they have to behave when they've washed out wide or when somebody ahead of them has washed out wide, all 22 of them will say this is a totalitarian state, this is horrible. This is the worst thing that's ever been done to racing. MotoGP will never be watchable again. And I think there will be popular support for that sentiment. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a complicated one. I ideally, I guess you do decide incident by incident. It probably should matter whose wheel is ahead at which point. It probably should matter as to the nature of the corner. But it's, I don't know. I mean, they should look closer, because these incidents keep happening, and when they do happen, people either go flying or get trapped under bikes. I mean, not much is clear. Bagnaia got trapped under bike today. Last year at Le Mans, it happened between him and Viñales. That was also a big one. Mm-hmm. Like, both of them were fortunate not to come off worse from that one. So clearly, it's something to think about, because, again, visibility on bikes when you're riding, clearly limited. Obviously, that's human biology.
Eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, it part of it comes down to there are unwritten rules of racing. And one of them has always been, if you go offline, it's your responsibility to merge back into the pack responsibly. And it's not codified anywhere. There is no rule that says that, much for the same reason that there is no rule that says it's illegal to take off your helmet and beat your opponent with it mid-race. Because it doesn't have to be said.
There's got to be a rule. I'm going to check that. There's got to be something in the sporting code.
Yeah, there is. It's covered under the same rule, because it essentially says you're riding irresponsibly. And it falls within that general broad. That's why it's not in the rules specifically. But it's there. People kind of know you don't do it. It's like cruising in the racing line, or it's like sitting up in the middle of a corner and having someone run into the back of you. It's irresponsible riding. And I think maybe it's one of those things that they need to be reminded of, but maybe it's something that MotoGP doesn't feel the need to remind them of, like certain other things that I would call irresponsible that they don't punish hard enough. Thinking yellow flags specifically, but anyway, that's deviating. I think that it's a fairly obvious breach of kind of racing etiquette.
I should say there's one part that I only considered when we were discussing what Pecco exactly said about the incident, because there was sort of a hint of it being like deliberate-ish, right? And I couldn't understand what he meant. My best theory, because obviously Alex Marquez had nothing to gain from exiting the race with Pecco. If you think Alex Marquez has a Jorge Martin shrine at his house or whatever, you're out of your mind. That's obviously not the case. I mean, he might have his preference as to who wins the championship, but it will not dictate how he goes about racing. But Alex Marquez does have a preference for finishing on the podium. And the suggestion, so Pecco's suggestion was that Marquez stayed on the throttle once they were coming into the corner. So either once the contact has already happened or was clearly going to happen. Alex didn't see him, so I imagine, or at least couldn't have known what moment the contact would come at. But if the throttle stayed on, then you could potentially argue maybe, we see a lot of MotoGP overtakes where, it's a bump and run. Somebody stays on the throttle and they're on the inside of the corner, but they, instead of yielding, they just usher the other guy out wide. And then they basically let the stewards sort it out or not sort it out, and they try to deal with that. I might believe that. That depends on the data, and that requires a close look at the data from everybody involved, which will not be available to us, but I really hope was available to the stewards. Clearly, riders should not be allowed to bump and run. They should not be allowed to initiate contact just to move somebody aside, because on bikes, contact through such corners at such speeds leads into bodies and bikes becoming intertwined and going to the gravel at horrible speeds.
Well, this is what I kind of class as like the Sepang 2015 revival element of this clash debate, because it's someone from the Rossi camp, which Pecco Bagnaia effectively is, as a Rossi protege, just intimating that something deliberate and dodgy and odd is going on, and that there were a lot of other rider reactions, and you could kind of see where the friendships and where the alliances were in a lot of them as well. Simon, do you think there's anything in what Pecco was insinuating there around how Alex Marquez handled that crash and what he was doing with his throttle?
So Pecco straight up said that he didn't believe that Alex had rolled off. And he said that the first thing he did when he got back in the box was kind of check the data and see, and that confirmed it. And I think what we can see, because we were quite lucky that Dorna's slow motion camera, the 2000 frame a second camera, was at that corner. So we have this beautiful shot of the collision, essentially. It's not beautiful if you're Pecco, because it shows exactly how horrible the crash was for him. But you can see Alex Marquez's throttle hand really clearly in it. And it very much looks like he's trying to style out the corner for himself at that point. Like he's realized that there's possibly an opportunity to get away with it for himself if he just keeps the gas open, regardless of what that does to Pecco's race. And there's possibly an argument that if he'd rolled off at that point, Pecco might have been able to pick up the bike again, or at least the crash wouldn't have been severe, or it wouldn't have, they wouldn't have ended up tangled together the way that they did. So I get where an element of his frustration is coming from there, because I think that, maybe Alex was a bit too gung-ho in the way that he dealt with the immediate aftermath of the first impact between the two. And we're talking something that's happened here in hundredths of a second, don't get me wrong. But we also know that MotoGP riders and that sort of like throttle reaction is kind of instinctual to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's if it's not an attempt to, and at that point, at the point of the footage, that's already, the crash is already happening. There's no bump and runs happening. There's an incident going on. But at that point, instinctually, it's going to be about trying to stay on, I think. But I would hope, and given the fact that, Bagnaia is aware of this, clearly the stewards will have been aware of this, I would like to imagine Alex Marquez and his Gresini team have been asked about it, and the stewards did mention in the verdict that data was used, which is nice. Data should be used.
It should, and also the fact that so often we say that stewards' decisions seem to be based on consequences, not intent or not cause. Well, this consequence-wise, this was hideous, and it was a no further action. So whether you agree with it or not, at least they're not following the precedent of the bigger the crash, the harder they come down on the rider. If you want more on this, listeners, and you want to see Val and Simon talking about that and see their real faces, we do have a MotoGP only YouTube channel on the race now. Search for the Race MotoGP for that, and you'll see these guys debating it with Simon in the paddock in our next video on that channel coming up early this week. If you like what we're doing on there, please subscribe, please like, because we're going to do more and more and more MotoGP videos, and the more momentum you help us build on that, the more of those we can do.
You know that's the sound of another sale on your online Shopify store, but did you know Shopify powers selling in person too? That's right, Shopify is the sound of selling everywhere, online, in-store, on social media, and beyond. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify is everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling platform that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers in-line and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
We've got a habit on this podcast of leaving discussing the race winner to quite late in the recording, because we often go into rider market, off-track shenanigans, that kind of thing for 45 minutes first. I didn't think we'd leave Marc Marquez till 20 minutes into the podcast when he won his first races on a Ducati, but that's exactly what we've done, thanks to his brother. So, Marc Marquez absolutely dominated the Aragon weekend on track. He hadn't looked like he was going to win a race for quite a while. We'd had such big pre-season expectations, and then as it became clear how long the adaptation would take, as it became clear how good the GP24 was and how old a spec of GP23 he was stuck on, I was starting to think this might not happen this year. But yeah, it really, really, really has happened. Obviously, loads of you in the Members Club commenting on this. I'm going to throw in this one from Etienne Gamache first, who says, would Marquez have won by 30 seconds on a GP24, Val?
No, I don't think so. But he would have won on a GP24, I think, maybe by a handful of seconds more. But this wasn't about the GP24 necessarily. I think he would have... There's a non-zero chance he would have won on any bike on the grid.
Bold.
Potentially. Okay, not Honda, not Yamaha, but
the others.
Not Aprilia, because it's been horrific this weekend. But there's a chance that most of this was just, weekend circumstance that allowed Marc to skate by on being Marc rather than on having the Ducati GP23.
I love that Val went, he could have won on any bike in the grid, and then basically reeled it down to he might have won on a KTM.
Bad. It's not good. Not one of my finest moments.
I think the difference if he'd been in a GP24 is that we wouldn't have come into this weekend thinking, oh, is this finally the one that Marc Marquez is going to win? We would have went into the weekend thinking, how much is he going to win by?
Yeah, I agree completely. And the difference, I think, would have been seen with a normal weekend, which this was not. Now, it wasn't normal from the start because obviously, so Aragon resurfaced this weekend, not this weekend, it was resurfaced in the lead up to this weekend, the lead up to MotoGP's return to the grid. Normally with a new surface, the grip is pretty good. And in some facets, apparently the grip was pretty good, but in other facets, mainly the fact that the track was consistently dirty. And then, the grip of the surface doesn't matter so much if there's stuff on it besides the actual new asphalt. And if there's stuff coming up from the asphalt, which I don't know if there was. But in any case, so the grip was very sketchy on Friday morning. He dominated. The grip became a lot more normal on Friday afternoon. He dominated still. He set the lap record. Then overnight rain happened. Grip was gone. Saturday morning practice, he's quickest by a lot. Saturday morning qualifying, he's quickest by a lot. Grip doesn't really come back. Saturday sprint, he wins it very, very comfortably. And then just as you'd think, well, okay, but the grip will build up now, because, we're running day after day, session after session, multiple classes, rains again. So we're reset again. And, the fact that the weekend kept resetting, that's Marc territory. So finally, he didn't have the cleanest run through the Saxon Ring for multiple reasons. He didn't have the cleanest run through the Circuit of the Americas, but also it was almost too normal. And there was honestly, I think even if he didn't crash, I think Maverick Vinales wins that 10 times out of 10. He had so much more than everybody else. But this weekend was weird in just the right ways for him every time, and it kept making sure that other guys can't touch him. We don't know if they could have in a normal weekend. It's it's pure hypothesis right now, but we know that this made it not easier, but this made it likelier that Marc was going to walk it, and he did.
Was it? I get the circumstances, and like you say, it's very much Marc territory. That particular change of grip and lack of grip is just glorious Marquez at his best. But a couple of questions are about the GP23's and Gresini's pace. Eric Yip. Eric, by the way, your question about chairs, which is absolutely brilliant, will not feature on this episode, but it will feature in the MotoGP Extra, promise. Eric Yip says, how was Gresini all of a sudden so quick? Because it wasn't just Marc. Alex had podium pace too before he did what he did. And Mr. Ice Cold Andy 23 said, although it was track specific, why were the GP23s, all of them, way more competitive relative to the GP24s here? So yes, a Marc genius here, but Simon, was this also just a better track for the GP23s and for Gresini?
Yeah, it seems to be partly grip related, and partly thanks to the fact that the big strength of the GP23 or 24s is straight line braking, and that was a bit diminished this weekend because of that lack of grip and corner entry that brought the 24 a little bit closer to it and let the 24 kind of do what it did last year a bit better. Kind of what it was doing last year was slightly different from what this year's bike doing, and that suited this weekend better because the grip was really terrible, which is probably really good news if you're any one of a number of riders heading to a few circuits in the coming weeks where grip is going to be a bit patchy. I mean, I would expect it to reset back to zero for Misano, which is normally super grippy and recently resurfaced properly, unlike Aragon, but we'll come to that. It's a grippy track, but then we go to Indonesia, then we go to Thailand, then we go to Motegi, where it rains a lot, places that aren't used that much. We might have this weird swing where we expected the GP23 to start the season really strongly because that's what it always does, and it doesn't this year. It might be the other way around, and they might have a decent run of form in the flyaways.
Yeah.
I think I'm not 100% convinced that the GP23 was maybe it was a bit closer. I'm not 100% convinced it was really fully unleashed or anything like that. I mean, Alex Marquez is just kind of good at Aragon, isn't he? And he's good in low grip. Digia, hard to assess Fabio Di Giannantonio because he's coming off his dislocated shoulder, still not 100% right. Marco Bezzecchi, you would have expected to have a much better weekend given the low levels of grip, and it didn't really come together for him massively at any point. And we still saw flashes of the GB24s kicking into extra gear when they got a bit of normal running. Like, there were, some moments in races where Enea Bastianini ran shockingly fast. He was just undone by grid position, which was a consequence of grip shenanigans, but also a yellow flag on Friday.
And a little bit of being Enea Bastianini as well.
And a little bit of being Enea Bastianini. Yeah, I mean, that's, the qualifying on Saturday was being Enea Bastianini, I think. Yeah. Jorge Martin was pretty quick in moments relative to Marquez, and I think Bagnaia, when things were going okay for him, had a bit, and they didn't have enough to challenge Marc over full distances, certainly. But I think the more sessions they got normal, the more grip. Well, as Simon says, he has grip, and obviously the understanding is that the more grip there is on track, the GP24 is able to exploit it better than anybody else. But you will also remember, we went to Barcelona with the expectation, the Aprilia is just going to walk this, and instead the GB24s of Bagnaia and Martin beat everybody into submission, just absolutely brutalized them. I don't think it's fully that. I think it is also just how the weekend played out, and it's just I find it hard to really parse at the moment. But another thing, and this was brought up coming into the weekend, Alex Marquez did say that the ride height device, the newer version that the newer Ducatis have and the older Ducatis do not, would pay massively in places like Red Bull Ring, at places like Motegi, but would not pay as much at somewhere like Aragon.
The other element beyond what actually happened this weekend is obviously looking forward to 2025, because all the time Marquez wasn't actually getting the job done, which might be a harsh way of putting it, but factually, he didn't want to race. There was this question mark over, was this matchup with Bagnaia next year going to be really everything we're expecting? Might it somehow be an anticlimax? Because I feel it a little bit sacrilegious saying this, but the more Marc crashed out of races recently, the longer it took for him to get near winning on this bike, the more I was starting to think maybe the moment has passed. Maybe the kind of handover of power happened when he was injured, and Bagnaia is now indisputably the greatest on the grid. Marquez is still great, but fading. This weekend felt a bit different on that front. Oscar Robledo from the Members Club, a very regular F1 podcast questioner. So, Oscar, thanks for joining us on the MotoGP side as well. It's much appreciated. He said, is Pecco Bagnaia worried about losing control of the garage with Marc Marquez's impending arrival, particularly given the masterclass he delivered today and yesterday? Simon?
No, I don't think Pecco is thinking that way at all. I think this will be Pecco's team for the foreseeable future. Marc is going to have to show up and learn a new squad, learn what he's doing, learn how factory Ducati works, because it's different from how the Gresini works. It will be Pecco Bagnaia's team for the foreseeable future. He's smart enough to know that, and I don't think he'll be stressing it too much at all.
Pecco doesn't have control of the garage in that way, in what we'd maybe perceive as the F1 way of being the driver that everything's built around, because we know, for instance, that Ducati has now gone twice against Bagnaia's wishes and his teammate. We know that, clearly he just does not have a lot of say in who is on the other side of the garage. Neither does he have much say, although he's never asked for them, so that's not entirely fair. But, we haven't seen team orders favoring Bagnaia or anything like that. He has sway. Clearly he's very important to Ducati, and he's earned a certain status by the massive accomplishments that he's delivered for the brand. But I don't think there's going to be like a control thing going on to where, they're trying to wrestle development pathways one from the other, etc. It's just, it's not going to be a question of control. It's going to be a question of which one of them's faster when they hit the track, starting in the Valencia test and then wherever else we're going in preseason testing. I can't remember. Sepang and
Buriram.
Yeah.
This is all so logical and correct in theory, but I just feel like you both underestimate the Marc Marquez factor. This is the man who kind of choreographed his arrival in that Ducati works team. This is the man who just got so much power over MotoGP and where he ends up still. It is Pecco's team. Pecco's done so much. He's so well embedded in there. But this is Marquez. There's scope for probably unspoken shenanigans. But Marquez will just put that kind of cold stare on the Ducati garage, and suddenly things will start happening his way. I'm sure of it. On the topic of kind of Marquez the myth a little bit, though, as I've kind of headed down that road, let's get emotional. Marquez hasn't won for 3 years. This is big. We've all followed his story for so long. Simon, you've done one-on-one interviews with him. You've done one for this podcast as well, in which he's been so open about the physical struggles, the questioning of himself over these years of not winning, of struggling. He's won again. That's amazing. What a story. Was it a little bit diminished by the fact it came in a sprint?
Nah.
No.
Because everyone knew that he was going to do it again on Sunday.
Yeah, that was also accurate.
And he kind of talked himself down a bit. Afterwards, he was talking about how there was still a huge amount of weight in his shoulders, about how he didn't feel like it was over until it was done on Sunday. It was almost like he didn't have the emotional release you'd expect until Sunday. And my God, when he had the emotional release, he had it. We all saw it. There was a proper outpouring. We were talking to Fabio Quartararo during his debrief, and there was a big screen behind him showing the live track action, and we kind of glanced around at one point, Fabio included, and Mark was riding an electric scooter across the infield on his slowing down lap. It was like world championship winning celebrations.
It really was.
It was mad. It was great. It was really, really good to see. And then he came into to his media afterwards, and he admitted that it was like kilos had been lifted off his shoulders, and then we saw the actual emotional response to it. So no, I don't think it diminished anything. I think it actually helped set up Sunday even better.
I'm going to engage in a bit of sacrilege here. I didn't feel anything necessarily on Saturday or on Sunday after he won, and I will explain why, because it's not any sort of personal attitude towards Mark or anything like that. It's because I felt I got out of this weekend what I needed to know out of it immediately on Friday and then again on Saturday. I got what I needed to see on Friday morning when he was blitzing everybody, and I got it on Saturday in qualifying in the morning when he went 8/10 quicker than anybody else, and in doing so recorded the biggest MotoGP pole margin since Brno 2019, which is also him, and the biggest in the dry since like 2011 or something like that. For me, the emotional wins are the wins that you're like, I'm not sure you were ever going to get it, or this is like your first one, but you've worked very hard. He's worked so hard to get back to where he is, obviously. I mean, they all work super, super hard, but I never had any doubt this was coming. Sooner or later, if not this year, then next year. And for me, he shows up to Aragon, there's no grip, and he blitzes them again. I know this Marc Marquez. I've seen him a million times. He's still the same guy to me in these conditions. The question is, when the weekends are more normal, does his diminished physicality a little bit on the right side, how much of that will be a limit in 25, etc.? But, in low grip like that on a left-handed dominated track, he's still Mark. I've learned nothing. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a really good ride, but it doesn't, it's not Digia's win from last year. It's not Zarco's win from last year. I didn't think I'd see those guys win. Mark, he was winning again. No question.
Val, you could have just said that you've got a cold, dead black heart and saved us all that explanation. I actually asked Mark afterwards about this, about if he thought he would win again in the press conference, and he was quite like, I asked him if he ever thought he wasn't going to win again, and then when he realized he would be able to win again, and he very quickly said, kind of, yes, I thought I wasn't going to, but, and changed the subject, and then went on to say he jumped in the bike at Valencia last year and was like, oh, this is fast, we can win on this again. So I think, I think he knew it was coming as well. So don't worry, Val. It's just you and Marc Marquez. The rest of the world's excited about it. I
mean, I'm excited about it. It was a great ride. No. I might have not phrased myself right. It's not, the best, the most like emotional win. We use the word emotional, is a win that you weren't sure was ever going to come. This was coming.
Yeah, for me, it was still the fact that the moment when it did come, given everything that's happened from 2020 onwards. I know he did win on the Honda after that, but
he won on a Honda.
Yes, yeah, but that was a long time ago. The man's had his arm reconstructed since then and been racked with self-doubt. I actually applauded from my office desk, which you couldn't hear because Devon's a long way from Aragon. But when he won the sprint, I was like, I'm glad I was working to see that. That's a nice moment. And I did think at that moment, it's a shame it's a sprint because I felt there might be some drama missing. And then in the Grand Prix, I was like, no, this actually still counts even more. This is still mega. And then his brother just distracted me completely. And it's like, oh, yeah, Mark won. Even before Pecco Bagnaia was being dragged along a gravel trap underneath a bike, he was having a pretty bad weekend. And the thing we haven't got to yet in this podcast is the championship swing, because he leaves Aragon 23 points behind Martin, which is certainly not something we were expecting a month ago. Let's just quickly delve into why Pecco was struggling even before that. He was only 9th in the sprint. We've got a bunch of questions on what happened with his starts, what happened with his pace. Claudio Silva says, was the sprint mainly a tyre issue, or might he have been mentally impacted by the bad start and losing places? Eric Yip says, what happened to Pecco's start? Everyone's been on about his great starts for weeks and he has 2 awful ones. JD asks, was Bagnaia's bad start related to bad traction control settings? Had they set it for a certain amount of wheel spin, maybe more than usual because of track conditions, and it proved too much? Simon, what went on with Pecco's start and what went on with his sprint pace afterwards? What are your theories?
So my theory on, let's do it one at a time because I think there might be 2 slightly different things at play here. The Saturday, the sprint start went wrong because the track was super dirty. What we've seen in the past is whenever you have one of those big slides, one of those big moments off the line, I think it kind of messes up the Michelins a little bit. Remember Jorge Martin in Qatar last year, where he did a massive slide off the line, cooked the tyre, and then basically blamed Michelin for costing him a title when everyone was like, hey, do you not think that weird moment you had might have done some damage to the thing that was trying to transfer 300 horsepower to the ground at the time? I think there's an element of that to it, and he struggled as a result from it, and the tyre didn't work. Sundays is a little bit more interesting because this is going to sound like a mad conspiracy theory, but I do have photographic proof of some of it. If you go back and look at the TV pictures, you can see that Davide Tardozzi was pretty unhappy on the grid with kind of the officials and trying to get their attention and whatnot. Before the MotoGP race, after the Moto2 race, former 500 Grand Prix world champion Alex Crivier went out and did a demo lap on his NSR 500 Honda. Whenever Pecco got to his grid spot after the sighting lap, there was a line of oil basically running through his grid spot, and Ducati are of the impression it came from the 500. They're of the impression that contributed to another bad start on a grid that was already a bit patchy and messy. There is photographs that quite clearly show there's a line of something spilled through Pecco's grid spot. I don't know if it's enough to kind of have caused what they're complaining about, because the pictures were taken after the race, not before the race. But maybe that's a contributing factor. Clearly it wasn't as bad as it was on Saturday, and I think that's why it didn't cook the tyre the same way. But the fundamental underlying issue is that he was on the dirty side of a really dirty track, and maybe whenever he realized he was third, he should have spent all of warm-up running on the left-hand side of the track just to make sure, because you don't want to go and clean it after the end of the day's action with your scooter, as his mentor Valentino Rossi is well aware.
Yes,
I thought you were going to say that he should have went around trying to impede as many people as possible to get a grid penalty to move off. But they're in increments of 3, so you're just moving down roads.
Yeah, he'd have had to have tricked someone else into doing it for someone in front of him into doing it for him. Slip Pedro Acosta a few quid to...
We should give credit to Jorge Martin as well, something I must admit I do enjoy doing because I like what he brings to MotoGP, but I'm giving credit to sensible Jorge Martin. As Dan Neal from the Members Club put it, is this Martin's best non-race winning weekend in MotoGP? And Vivek Siram took it a bit further, said, despite not winning a Grand Prix since Le Mans in May, and obviously there's the Sachsenring fall in the middle, is this the best stretch of performances we've ever seen from Jorge Martin? The fall in Germany finally seems to have knocked it through his head that he doesn't need to win every race by 5 seconds to win the title. I'll go as far as to suggest that a sensible Martin is a far more dangerous title threat than the fast Martin. Vivek, I agree with you. It is less fun, but it is definitely better for winning championships. What do you guys think about the form we're seeing from Martin at the moment?
I don't think it's his best weekend ever, because there's not the same pressure in finishing second to Marc Marquez as there is to finishing second to Pecco Bagnaia when you're fighting him for the title. So I think it wasn't quite his best weekend ever. In terms of his best run of form ever, I think that was sort of Barcelona through Motegi last year, when he had a couple of wins, really made the best of Pecco being injured.
But no asterisk for this one as opposed to that one.
No. But there is an asterisk in the middle of this run of form, because there's Germany, there's Sachsenring, and the fact that he did fall off whenever he shouldn't have. Yeah. That's the blip, and ironically that's what ended the run of form last year too, because he fell off at Indonesia in literally exactly the same circumstances. A comfortable result on the cards, and he threw it away. So yeah, I mean, it's been good, but he did do that stupid thing that he always does in the middle of it. So I'm not quite willing to say he's overdoing stupid things quite yet, especially as he hasn't been winning recently. You have to go all the way back to Le Mans to find that win, and there should have been at least one more win in the middle of that, and then his championship standings would be looking really comfortable, and they're good right now, but it's because as this title fight keeps showing, because the two of them are sabotaging each other rather than because of his run of form.
Not just sabotaging each other, Alex Crivilla as well, actively sabotaging the title fight.
Yeah, bloody Spaniards.
I think it's
a joke. It's a joke.
I don't remember very well all the weekends Jorge Martin has had in MotoGP.
Really?
We have a lot of MotoGP weekends. I barely remember the last one, and I think I was there for it. And I'm not even entirely sure I was.
Remember the last weekend without MotoGP?
Fair enough. I do. It was in 2013 or no. But I think I'm not going to change myself on this. I don't believe he's more sensible or whatever. I don't believe he was massively unsensible before. I think it's easy to accept finishing second to Marc Marquez at Aragon when Marc Marquez qualifies 8/10 clear of everybody else and dances around the track and, finds grip where nobody else has grip. It's easy to come into a weekend and go, you've got this. I'll just hoover up whatever else is available. And I also think, for me, it's always those crashes. It's usually not a rider deciding to crash or to risk crashing. It's just, this is too hard to think in that way. It's not about how, sometimes it's about the pace they run, but sometimes it's just about, the groove that they find. And then sometimes there's a lapse in concentration. That's not being sensible necessarily. It's just making a mistake and mistake-proofing your brain in whatever way they do it. That's for me anyway. So I don't think there's been a step change, but again, that's not a criticism of Jorge Martin. I think he's quick enough to win this title, and he's weathered a bunch of tracks where I thought he could have lost a fair few points to Pecco Bagnaia, but instead he's approaching the flyaways now in healthy shape. And Misano 1, Misano 2, Pecco might well draw level or even draw ahead there, but then the flyaways start, and it's game on. It's properly game on.
If you want to get your question featured on next week's podcast after Misano 1, we are doing a 7-day free trial on Patreon for the Members Club at the moment. This is an excellent time to check out what we're doing. And we'll have some MotoGP extras coming up for you in the next few weeks as well, including the return of our roving reporter, Ollie, after his behind-the-scenes Silverstone special. We're sending him somewhere else to do something a bit different, which is going to be absolutely fascinating next week as well. Back to the current list of questions from those already in the Members Club. We're going to wrap up this episode with a quick fire run through everything else you've thrown at us after the Aragon weekend. So, Simon, one for you to start with. Khan says, could you elaborate on a dirty track? How does it work that fresh rain makes the track dirty? Is it a drainage runoff issue where fresh rain washes dirt onto the track? Or is this an inherent design problem or just a temporary concern? Simon, rain track physics, go.
I had to send Val a Wikipedia page to make him believe me that Aragon has dirty rain.
It's true.
It is true. Yeah, we're not even exaggerating. You get a weird phenomenon here. You get it in a few places, actually. It's a big thing in Portimao as well because it's so close to the Sahara, where if you're somewhere that's quite arid and dusty, and there's high winds, which there always are here because we're out in the middle of nowhere in the desert. The wind picks up a lot of dust. The dust gets in the air. Whenever it rains, the rain contains dust in it. And it makes things dirty rather than clean, like you'd expect from rain showers. It's really apparent here because you see it in like the window of your hire car in the morning whenever you get up to head to the circuit. And essentially what it means is every time it rained here, it A, washed away whatever rubber had been left down, and B, left behind a load of dust in place of that rubber. And that's why I think you can really, really, really see it if it was really visible in morning warm-up, whenever it was still a little bit damp, to throw that dust up into the moisture that was coming off the track as well. The bikes were filthy at the end of it. It reminded me of the very, very first day of track action at Mandalika, back whenever we tested there in 21 or 22. It was exactly the same phenomenon where the bikes were just coming in filthy and covered in dust and dirt. And that's what it is. The rain here brings dirt instead of washing it away.
I'd forgotten that Mandalika test. I remember you making yourself really popular with the circuit authorities with your coverage of that. That was...
yeah. And the Indonesian government.
Yeah, whoops. Oh, well. They've let you back in. Next question from Philippe Dennis, or Philippe Denis, or Felipe Denis. I hope at least one of those has been the correct pronunciation, and I apologise for my flaws. What happened to the factory Aprilias on Saturday? This was a question Philippe chucked in on Sunday morning. They were seconds away from pole, which in modern MotoGP time, seconds like years. And in the sprint, Aleix Espargaro messed up the start, and Maverick Vinales was further down the pack the whole race. Now, that Vinales Grand Prix was even more hideous on that front. Val, what was up with the factory Aprilias?
Yeah, I mean, the second the rain washed away the grip and made the track weird, they had no chance. And I think because, we are used to the Aprilia being pretty nifty in low grip, but I guess there's a difference between low grip and the stuff that was going on at Aragon specifically, which maybe even sort of benefited the bikes that are, I guess, good in the wet and the riders that are good in the wet. And Aprilia, when is the last time you've seen an Aprilia be good in sort of like wettish conditions? I can't think of a single instance, honestly. There's probably one not coming to my head. The technicalities, if I knew, I'd probably be employed there. But all I can say is it appears that there's a very sort of narrow window at which it's the best, and it appears that this year's Aprilia, in particular, for whatever reason, is very, very potent on the softer tires. And you see it, it was very good in qualifying round after round after round. It was very good on Friday afternoon when the weekend grip at its absolute peak. We saw, I think Aleix was second, Maverick was third. And at that point, their weekend was looking okay, but Aragon reverted after rain, and the Aprilias do seem to chew tires pretty badly now, and they couldn't get what was available for Aragon to work. And the Aragon tires, they weren't soft tires because the wear is pretty significant, and just for whatever reason, they couldn't get it to work at all. The only Aprilia rider who came out of this weekend with any credit is Miguel Oliveira. And we've seen Miguel Oliveira before, and what kind of conditions has Miguel Oliveira been particularly potent at before? Well, you can fill out the rest of that, even though then he crashed out on Sunday immediately, but he was running sixth. None of the other Aprilia sniffed sixth in any of the races, weren't close.
The fact that he was high enough that his crash gave Pecco Bagnaia a position showed he was, for those 20 seconds he was in the race, doing pretty well. And
Aleix fought through it on Sunday. Look, I don't know. Only Maverick knows how much of an effort he was putting in. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But the way he described it is like, I had like 5 near high sides and I gave up and parked it in the pits. I don't know if he gave up before he parked it in the pits, like maybe a few laps before, because he was running Moto 2 lap times, which is not normal. But there is clearly an operating window problem with the Aprilia. And we should also say, Raul Fernandez also had a really bad race. Really, really bad. So clearly it's a finicky bike.
On the subject of Aragon Surface and Espargaro, Matthias Kainz asks, is there any chance of Espargaro becoming something of a rider representative when he retires, like Alex Wurz with the GPDA in F1? Because after the shit show that's been the Aragon track surface, it seems heavily needed. Simon, you nodded straight away there. I think you might rather like the idea of Aleix as rider union warrior.
I'd like it, but the problem is he'd be too good at the job, and that means it'll never happen because not everyone agrees with Aleix's rather hardline take on a lot of issues, and that includes his current fellow riders. There's a lot of stuff that Aleix complains about that makes other riders roll their eyes, and he'd never get elected into the position as a result. As much as I think he'd be very, very good at it, because generally, I think even whenever he's being a bit of what could be deemed by some people to be an obnoxious prat sometimes, he's doing it with his heart in the right place. He's doing it with, what he believes to be the best intentions of the championship. So yeah, I think he would struggle to get elected into the role, even if he would probably be very good at it.
Yeah, the important thing is that he cares.
Yeah.
Like he just he doesn't just care. And that's not to say that, the other guys, many of the other guys, some of the other guys do care quite a bit about wider issues, but a lot of them are like laser focused on their weekend, their team's development, etc. Aleix just, he's enough of a fan of MotoGP, but also just kind of just seems to care about those matters. And that's, to me, for a union rep, that's the main ingredient.
Very heart on sleeve with the stuff he cares about as well, which is both admirable, but I'm sure in a diplomatic role could be problematic sometimes. Pranab Shinoy says, this is one for Val, no factory teams made the podium, which until I read that question, I was like, yeah, interesting. Didn't spot that. With constantly changing track conditions over the weekend, it seemed the Michelin tyres couldn't keep up. Is this a sign that the factory teams rely too heavily on data and are less adaptable in changing conditions, whereas satellite teams let riders take control when things get unpredictable? Val, what do you reckon?
I don't think so, because I think it's too circumstantial to go off one weekend. But I do think what happened is, and again, I mean, in modern MotoGP, it's not like it's unusual to see Jorge Martin or Pedro Acosta or Marc Marquez on the podium. I mean, if the podium was made up of 2 LCRs and an RNF Aprilia that wandered onto the paddock and nobody stopped it, then maybe. But I think it's more that, what was happening during the weekend was basically like the great equalizer. So at that point, that meticulous super work that the Ducati factory team, for instance, does, that makes Pecco and Enea ludicrously fast on Sundays, the fastest that they are in the weekends they are on Sundays. Well, it wasn't available this week in Aragon because nothing was normal, because the lap times were fluctuating too much. So I think it's more that it equalized than it played into the hands of the satellite teams by equalizing things, not by prioritizing the way they work, if that makes sense.
Let's divert away from MotoGP and head to Moto2 for our final questions. Hayes, very regular questioner, Hayes, it's always appreciated. During the world feed commentary of the Moto2 race, it was mentioned how the Pramac MotoGP seat drama, and this is that going to Jack Miller almost certainly at the expense of Moto2 leader Sergio Garcia, may have had a psychological effect on Garcia, who had a disastrous race today. Do you guys think this is true? And are we witnessing a Tony Arbolino-style drop-off in championship contention with Garcia? So, Simon, quickly fill listeners who didn't catch all the racing this weekend in on what's going on in Moto2 and with Garcia. And do you think not getting the MotoGP chance is playing into the dramas he's having?
So Sergio Garcia had an absolute disaster of a race. His race was so bad that whenever he was running in P24 and was given a penalty for exceeding track limits, a long lap penalty, instead of taking the penalty, he pulled into the pits and parked the bike because things were that bad. It had been a really tough weekend for him. To be fair, it wasn't a great weekend for any of the speed-up bikes. This is not the kind of domination we've seen over the last few rounds from them. It was much tougher this weekend.
Yeah.
And the MT Helmets team kind of speculated fairly openly that they thought that Garcia was struggling a little bit mentally with the MotoGP rejection, and that's where this was coming from. I have heard since then that two things. One that is that Garcia is not particularly happy right now, but it's not with not going to Moto2, it's with his side of the garage, and he's actually asked if he can work with Ayogura's side of the garage next year whenever Ayogura graduates to the Premier class. The other thing that I've heard is that he's really not happy with the team for suggesting that he's struggling mentally because of the MotoGP thing, whenever he feels that the actual reason that he, and I would presume some of the other speed-up Boscoscuro bikes were struggling this weekend, is because they brought a new chassis that isn't working very well, and that it's something that's out of his hands.
The Boscoscuros have, it's been a gradual process to where, instead of running 1, 2, 3, 4 all weekend, they only have sort of one representative up top, and then, they filter out over the rest of the over the rest of the grid. It's been clearly, you know, what was an easy run to the title is now not that, very obviously. I can see why it would be really irritating for people to suggest, oh, it's just, you know, it's just in his head, he's just buckling. He wanted his, you know, MotoGP chance and he didn't get it. And now he's throwing his toys in the pram, out of the pram. I'm sure that's, you know, having some impact. But it's, you know, this kid fought for Moto3 titles. You know, this is, you know, Grand Prix front running is his life, basically. I think it is a little bit ridiculous to me to suggest that he's running a second and a bit off the pace in 25th, not on the scoring pylon thing on the broadcast because his feelings have been hurt. Now, to me, I don't buy that. It's plausible, I guess, but it's not Occam's razor. I don't think so.
And he is still Moto2 Championship leader, albeit not by much, 12 points over Agura now, with Alonso Lopez creeping up quite fast on both of them. Staying in Moto2, let's end the podcast with Fermin Aldiger Corner, which you've both said you'd like to answer.
Of course.
Maurice Henry says, after yet another disastrous race with Fermin Aldiger, do you think his MotoGP career is like to be short-lived? Actually, Maurice, your question about Pirelli we'll save from MotoGP Extra, because that's a much bigger chat. Fermin Aldiger, Val, it's your right to go first.
Why is it my right to go first?
You've earned it, Val. I'm not going to argue
You've
this.
earned it. Long-time advocate.
So, honestly, Aldiger's form has been...
You got him the Ducati seat, basically.
Yeah, I'm getting commission from him. But I shouldn't have said that. But honestly, his form has been really bad in recent weekends, and it was particularly like the 2 weekends before this one. They were very concerning because he had no speed. He was running, you know, he couldn't qualify, couldn't race. He was barely in the same race as some of the other guys. And that's not normal. That's not the problem you should be having. You can have a less than ideal Moto2 season, but you can't have no pace. No pace is the big issue. I think that was sorted this weekend generally. I think if he stays on the bike, he's probably on the podium, or at least fighting it out with Alonso Lopez, who I think has been really good for the podium. But I think he's also buckling under the pressure, which I know the previous answer, by the way, I've spent a long time going like, no, it's not psychological at all, definitely not. And now I'm here suggesting it's psychological. But it's just, you know, he's been making wrong decisions in Moto2 title fight this season in races. He's, you know, this time he crashed out in a move on Dennis Onchu that was never on. There's no reason to do it. He just, you know, because clearly he just wants to win. He just wants to make up the points. He wants to prove to everybody that Ducati was right in signing him, that he's still a Moto2 title contender. And in that desire, I think, is leading him astray right now, because I think the speed generally is there. I also think this particular patch has no bearing on what will happen in MotoGP. Like in that regard, I think forget all of this, see how he goes in Valencia, and then go from there. You know, it's MotoGP. The most important thing is how he will gel with Desmos Edici. Bagnaia's excellent Moto2 championship season did not matter an iota when he struggled in 2019 as a rookie. Then his struggles in 2019 as a rookie also did not matter one iota when he suddenly kicked into gear and then took over the factory ride and then became champion. Fabio Quartararo's Moto3 and Moto2 careers stopped mattering immediately once he was good on the Petronas Yamaha. And equally, we've had a lot of, you know, good guys come in and just never click. That's more important to Ducati, but also it will be worrying to Ducati that he's not responded to the challenges of this season. It looks to me quite in the right way.
I think he's young and dumb, and sometimes we forget how young he is, and that kind of tempers a little bit of what's going on. He is very young. He is young by Moto2 standards, let alone, you know, soon to be MotoGP standards. I think we talked about this earlier, Val, didn't we? I said that, you know, I think the best thing Ducati could do about him, they have a 2-year contract with an option for 2 more years. They should take the second 2 years right now and then just forget that they've signed him and just wait until he's fast again, because it'll come. Because he needs to learn a bit more about life, as well as being a racer and what to do and how to manage these crazy situations he's found himself in. Not everyone is Pedro Acosta, who has, you know, liquid nitrogen running through his veins and does not does not nothing that happens to that boy kind of flicks the radar and stressing him out. And I think not everyone is like that, especially at that age. I wasn't. And I think he just needs a bit of time to mature into himself, and it'll come, and he'll still be fast when it does come, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen with the whole world saying, why are you awful this weekend when you've because that's essentially what's happening right now.
Yeah. But that is also part of the game. That's you need to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, of course you do. But
MotoGP.
But most riders
it might come with age, but it might not.
But most riders that are learning to respond to that are doing it in Moto 3 with maybe a Moto 2 contract signed for the next year,
yeah.
Not a 4-year factory Ducati contract. And I think that's what's making it worse at the minute.
For context, Aldeguer is the third youngest rider on the Moto 2 grid right now out of the regulars. 19
wow.
and a bit.
Yeah, he's that young. Yeah.
He's that young. Yeah. That's clocked. Obviously, he's even younger than Acosta, but to put in context how relatively old the rest of the Moto2 grid had passed me by, that's mad.
Jake Dixon, who will probably win the title potentially,
is that's 20, a turnaround in sentiment.
Like, to be fair, earlier today I wrote a maker piece with an Alonso Lopez title, so clearly I'm not committing to anything. I'm completely useless.
Alonso Lopez, I will be fast enough to win the title, but will do everything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen.
This seems like a common theme of Moto2 title fights. Certainly,
yeah.
Nobody wants them.
No.
Yeah,
and that's why
Nobody
Jake Dixon, who did not score a single point for the first 5 races of the season, is now actually looking slightly ominous. Anyway. Pedro Acosta cropping up there as well reminds me. Pedro Acosta back on the podium this weekend. First time in ages, looking excellent. And yet so much other stuff happened. And they're going to blame, again, Alex Marquez for this mostly. It means we haven't even discussed Pedro Acosta. But I've got a feeling we might once or twice in, say, the next 15 years. So it'll work out fine. Thank you, listeners, for the questions from the Members Club. Thank you for your patience with us as ever. I hope at least a few of you applauded, had an emotional tear, did something other than just look at Marquez winning and go, well, he was fast in the first lap of practice, so whatever. I had my party then. We'll be back in your ears after Misano 1 next week. See you then.
The Athletic.